Jake here from Base Factory Performance Training, and tell me if this cycle sounds familiar to you. So you train hard and then you get hurt, and then you have to wait until you feel good again. And then once you feel good again, then you start training hard again and you feel good, and then you get hurt again, and then you start that cycle, rinse and repeat. So you're not the only one that recognizes this pattern, because I've experienced this myself with back pain and back injuries. I wanted to go over why you might be experiencing back pain while doing back squats and what you can do about it to get back to back squatting pain-free. So let's get started. Okay, so a good first step in figuring out why you're experiencing pain in the back squat is to do a thorough movement assessment. These moves that I'm going to go over with you are the ones that are going to give you the best idea of where you are having limitations and what you need to work on in order to get out of pain in your back squat. So this first movement is the standing lumbopelvic flexion test. It's basically you stand hip width apart and you reach down and you touch the ground with straight legs. In this test, you might notice that, I'm able to touch the ground. But an important thing to notice when you're performing the test for yourself is, where do you feel it? When I'm doing this, yes, I feel a good stretch in the hamstrings and in the low back, which is normal. But I also feel tension going into my calves, which indicates something different and something that would make this a limited test. I'll go over one of the interventions that I do for my specific sensation of feeling tension into the calves. You have to realize that based on your sensations and limitations, it's going to indicate a different intervention for a specific limitation. This test is the kneeling heel to butt test. What this is testing is terminal knee flexion, which is really important for squatting, because if you don't have good mobility here, then squatting low is going to be very difficult. The things that it's testing is your quad flexibility, as well as your ankle plantar flexion mobility. So it's very simple, and this is considered a full test what I'm doing. If you're not able to sit on your heels because your quads are tight and you need to work on some flexibility in them. If you're not able to sit down on your heels and you have space in front of your ankles, that means that you have limited plantar flexion, which is another intervention that you would have to do. This next one that we're going to go over is the dorsiflexion test for your ankles. Basically, the reason why this is important in the squat is because if you have limited ankle mobility, it is going to limit how low you can squat. Let's look at my test. So as you can see on my right side, I'm just a little bit limited, and I just mainly feel it in my calf. Then I do the left side, and on the left side, I notice that it is significantly easier to do, which means that I just need to do a little bit of work on the calf muscle on the right side. This next test that we're going to be doing is the supine hip flexion test. Basically, what it is testing is how far you can bring your knee to your chest before your hips or your pelvis starts to move. Once your pelvis starts to go from neutral to start to moving posteriorly, then that's going to tell you where you have to stop. I stick my hand under my low back so I can feel if it starts to press into the ground, because I'm bringing my knee up. I can get a little bit farther before I start to feel it tuck, and then I move it out a little bit farther just to see a little bit more range of motion. Which this means that for me, it helps if I stand a little bit wider with my toes out a little bit. And that's going to give me, what my squat stance should be, as well as how far or how deep I should squat. One thing that you don't want to see is what I do next when you squat, where you squat down and then you see a bunch of butt wink. Now I'm going to show you some of the interventions that I use for my specific results from the assessment. The first thing that we noticed in the lumbopelvic flexion test is that I felt a lot of sensation go into my calves. Something that indicates is that I might have some irritation of the sciatic nerve. And this movement right here is a sciatic nerve floss. So basically, I'm extending the knee in a seated position and flexing the neck, which creates a lot of neural tension in that system. And it helps me basically desensitize the nerve and get a little bit more range out of it. And then after that, I've got the banded hamstring lockout. And so this is helping lengthen my hamstrings because my hamstrings are pretty tight, and it was limiting a lot of what I was able to do in that lumbopelvic flexion test. So the next movement that I have in my regimen that I use is an eccentrically loaded calf raise. The reason why I use this is because my calves were pretty tight in that ankle dorsiflexion test. So what I need to do is I just try and work on the musculature and increase the flexibility of the calf itself. So the reason why I'm doing this posteriorly banded distraction for the hip is because I kind of felt a little pinch in the front of the hip when I do squats. And what that does is it kind of pulls the head of the femur a little bit back in the hip socket so that it creates a little bit more space. And then another thing that we're doing, because in the supine hip flexion test, if I tried to bring my thigh to my ribs, it started to push my low back into the ground. That just means that I need to work on core stability and being able to brace. So some good movements that I use is the dead bug, and I also use the bird dog, which is training a similar movement pattern, but it's training a lot of stability in the core. And as you see in the bird dog, I'm not trying to extend my back by kicking my heel up. I'm just trying to train stability. All right, guys, so those are just some of the things that I do in my coaching to assess people's squats and just movement in general, to see what things we need to do to improve their limitations so that they can move pain-free and get out of this cycle of training hard, getting hurt, taking time off, and then repeating again. So if you're ready to get out of this cycle of injury and to be able to train pain-free in back squats and more, scan this QR code and set up your free performance consultation with me today.